So just a quick reminder on the speaker feedback thing. I have the laser. All right, hi everyone. I'm Michael Windsor. I'm here today to talk to you about the past 3 years of funding security and open source and the many lessons we've learned in doing it. When I prepared this deck, I was thinking it was a 30-minute talk. The good news is I put in way more slides than I had time for, even in a 3-hour talk. So we're gonna go. I like an interactive conversation. So if you have something to say while I'm saying it, jump in. Let's do it. We don't have to wait till the end to get to questions. Will this thing advance? Okay, so Alpha Omega is a project as part of the Linux Foundation. It was co-founded by myself and Michael Scavetta, who will raise his hand, by Google and Microsoft at the time. And we have since been joined by Amazon. And this is our mission. We're here to actually go off and cause change in open source ecosystems to make them more secure. We are not a traditional fund in any way, shape, or form. We're certainly not a traditional Linux Foundation project or foundation either. And part of how we do things is part of the conversation today. I went backwards. That's why I didn't go. Okay. So when we talk about Alpha and Omega, when we first started out, Alpha was looking at the top 100 most critical open source projects. And then we found out that A, nobody could agree what they were, and B, most of the obvious ones were getting a lot of attention, and C, giving them money wasn't going to make them more secure. The problems they had were not about resources and money, they were just problems. We've evolved that to focusing on points of leverage, where we can, with judicious spending, cause change, catalyze change, cause leadership to emerge, and create changes that go long past our involvement. And that's really the goal. We don't want to be a permanent funding security work to the end of time. But the other end of the scale, Omega, is for the hundreds of thousands of projects that are not just going to move because they're part of some larger project or foundation, or there aren't resources to do so, and they still represent risks, opportunities, and challenges for everybody. Since we started, we've raised about $23 million, and very little of it has gone to trips to Fiji. It's one of our running jokes that we're going to have a board meeting in Fiji one day, and somehow we never seem to do it. We have been funded by Google, Amazon, and Microsoft, as I said, and most recently, Citi joined us as a general member as well, and thank you very much to Citi. These are just the sort of major ecosystems that we have funded below there. So we're going to talk first about the scaled part of the problem, because it's really hard. And I'll be very direct. We have not figured it out yet. We're still poking at it and trying and learning along the way. And I've likened this to cleaning up the Pacific garbage patch. In fact, we have funded efforts. There have been a couple of other talks where I or Munawar have mentioned this. We funded some efforts to go off and do scaled sort of static analysis of code, finding, fixing, pushing out PRs of vulnerabilities in thousands of projects. We took the top 2,000 projects in PyPI, for example, and tried that. And then we did more. And the result was like, okay, you did work. The cost per project was actually not bad. So if I had, $20 million to burn, maybe I could do that all every year to keep cranking away. But it wasn't actionable. And that was really the hard point. We could do this work. We could prove that we'd done something useful, and nobody was able to do anything else differently. They were not able to take less risk somewhere else or more risk somewhere. There's nothing they could do about it. It became clear that we're going to need a bigger boat or a different approach. We have evolved, and earlier on, Jarek and I gave a talk about this, to an approach we call cleaning the beach. And that is, instead of trying to solve for the whole Pacific garbage patch, we actually look at a beach that is a community, right? And if you think about beaches, right, a town beach or a popular beach, people go there and they care about it and they make at least some effort. And every now and then, maybe the town gets together and has a beach cleaning thing, or they hire a truck to go and do it because everybody wants to pay their taxes to do that. Either way, people want to keep their beach clean. It's not the whole shoreline. It's certainly not the whole ocean. But if we can do it in a small area, it actually causes change that sticks. And so we've done this a few times now, where we've gone into a project, helped them identify their supply chain, help them come up with methodologies. In many ways, we just pay them to figure it out, and then they go do it. And they start looking upstream and paying attention to upstream. And that is something that doesn't happen as often as you'd like, right? The XZ situation taught us something that every single open source project is just as bad as all the corporations who suck their code for free. They use the stuff upstream as if it came down on the back of a unicorn with rainbows coming out of every pore, right? They don't pay attention to upstream. And what's happening now in Airflow and in other projects is they're starting to look upstream and to spend money, time, and effort fixing the code that they use. So now I'm going to switch gears a bit and talk about the various transformations that we've done and how we have caused ecosystems to start shifting their focus and becoming more secure. This talk is almost in random order. I could have mixed these slides up, and maybe one day I will. One of the first things we did was pay money to the Python Software Foundation to hire a security engineer in residence. And then we gave money to the Eclipse Foundation to hire a security team to focus on security across the entire Eclipse Foundation's portfolio of projects. We're making it someone else's job. But those were like obvious, we can start their places. For an awful lot of projects that come to us, we start with an audit. We really like to start with an audit. When you do an audit, the obvious thing is you find out all the problems in the code. And I say all, and I'm laughing now because of course you don't. You spend lots of money having some engineers look at it and find some of the more obvious problems that are lurking in the code and maybe some of the less obvious ones. And depending on how much money you spend, you may find more things. But even before that, the project's willingness and interest in having that audit happen tells you everything you need to know about the security posture of that project. And this is one of the fallacies that we're drinking everywhere, right? Is people look at things and they worry about how many vulnerabilities. And there are laws now about, or regulations about zero vulns. Thou shalt not release with any vulnerabilities or known vulns. That's not the problem. The problem is the process of the culture of the organizations fixing those vulns. So starting with an audit is a great way for us to test things. And we are increasingly interested in, and the Eclipse Foundation has been leading the way here, maybe raise your hand, Mika, to reduce the cost of these audits to get that early signal, to do the minimal audit to see if that can cause them to do anything and if it changes any behavior at all. If it doesn't, you have a much bigger problem, and a deep audit won't help that. So going back to the staffing, at the Python Software Foundation, it wasn't like nobody cared about security in Python. There were a security mailing list, there were issues, there's a backlog of things, everybody knew about the problems. But when security is everybody's job, it's no one's job. And the mere act of making it someone's job, these slides are going to be available. There's a QR link at the end. You can take the whole deck and reuse it anytime you want. And so by having an amazing person named Seth Larson show up and become the security engineer in residence, all kinds of questions went from being committee conversations and dialogues and debates where no one was really teed up to do the work to being, that's Seth's job. And Seth then delegated other people. He wrote some documents, told people to do this, and created order where there was chaos. And if you go now and look at the past couple of years of just the staggering amount of design documents and initiatives and programs and efforts that have happened inside Python because of what Seth did, right? It's amazing. And we love that pattern. When we fund those roles, we're very careful not to be pulling the rug out from under them. So as I mentioned, we don't want to be a durable, enduring fund and having to pay at the end of time. It's hard. We keep money in reserve so that we give our sort of staffing roles at least a year's notice if we run out of money, because we are just hand to mouth from our donors as much as anybody else's. This picture is meant to illustrate that everybody else is working on really cool growth-oriented features and the security backlog remains untouched. So a key thing is Seth doesn't do all the work, right? A security role is about creating a place where security becomes normal, becomes easy to do, becomes a priority, and that there are opinionated, reasoned approaches to doing that. It sounds like a lot, it is, but when you make it someone's job, it happens. And again, I can now point to Eclipse, Apache, Ruby, Rust, Python, Node.js, and OpenJS all have staffing roles focused on security outcomes, driving real change. I'll come back to how that has got some sustainability challenges in it as well. But the key lesson from here, right, is that when you're thinking about security, whether it's an open source or your own, right, the current set of vulnerabilities you have doesn't matter for shit. All right. The processes you have are more important than that. If you have processes that are working well and fixing them, great. If you don't have a culture of it, doesn't matter. And if you don't have the right people, you're dead in the water. You could do all the things, you could mandate them. And that's true in every business, no matter it's open source, a for-profit, a non-profit, doesn't matter, because everybody has a set of priorities that they've already inherited. The business got to where it is for various reasons, and none of them were for its own internal security. Even if you're a security business, selling security as a software product, your priorities are growth of your business, not your own security. It becomes a tension inside the business. So let's talk about how we turn money into security. What are the things that we have done? What things we feel have worked well for us? We are very biased towards shovel-ready work. When someone comes to us with a proposal, and we're like, oh, that's a great proposal, we do it. And we're like, we're ready to fund it. Like, great, give us the money. I'm like, do you have the person who's going to do the work? No, we're going to look for one. Great, go look for them. We'll talk about the money when you have the person. Do you know what the work is going to be, how they're going to do it? No, we're going to have them design that for us. Great, come back when you have a plan, right? We're not a research organization. If they think of a spectrum from like papers to products, we're pretty biased over here and solution-oriented, like that, and also short-term impact, right? So the staffing roles represent the long-term. You're here to just keep doing things. And guess what? They self-organize and do things that have quarter-by-quarter impact so they can explain why their job is worth it. When we're funding a specific initiative or a project, if somebody comes to us with something, say, oh, it's going to take about a year to build this piece, that then is a thing that does a thing, and then we'll get it to market. Like, no, that's not our cup of tea, right? We like to be able to come back quarter after quarter and talk about intermediate results, meaningful outcomes, and build on them. We are, again, also very biased towards creating public good. We do work with commercial entities, sometimes as vendors, to work on open source projects. We have entertained conversations from commercial entities that have an open source and private component, and there are all kinds of gray areas in there. But by default, if what you're doing isn't obviously for a public open source collective good, we're going to take a more jaundiced eye to it. Governance matters. Community engagement matters. I don't want to name any names. There was some project that approached us for a grant this year, and it's a company that's got some software that does a thing. I don't even need to say what it was. And they've open sourced the software like many companies do, and they asked us to help fund improvements to the security of their product. That open source product has exactly one organization contributing to it, which is the business that's profiting from that software. Hell no, that is not a pattern for us. But we have, I think one of my favorite examples actually is a small little ecosystem that has found a real balance between commercial and public good benefits. So in PHP, there's a packaging system called Packagist. If you use PHP, you probably use packagist.org. There is packagist.com as well. And packagist.com can be used by enterprises to run their own private repositories, and there's a general public one as part of a commercial entity as well. That team is a team of about 6 or 7 people living in Germany. They're making a living. They're not making money hand over fist. They contribute fairly equally to the open source good. They keep these code bases well aligned. There's not a dramatic difference. And so when they approached us, we had a conversation about doing an audit to improve it. They committed to spending their engineering resources to fixing all the problems sustainably. And we're like, great, we'll do an audit and see how that goes. It was fantastic. Worked really well. And they've found that balance. As I said before, we really look for leverage. We're not in it to keep funding something forever and ever that's just a bottomless pit of work until the end of time. We're looking for things that then cause change, that have impact beyond one person, one project, one thing. I think a fine example of this is funding that we did for a project with Homebrew. So if you use almost any computer these days, you probably use Brew install something. If you use GitHub Actions, by default, Brew is there available for you to pull tools in as well to your environment. So Homebrew now has implemented SIG-Store attestations for end-to-end verification from the build side all the way down to the Brew client to verify those attestations and the build process. It's pretty awesome. For us, that is connecting an entire ecosystem of people who use Brew and bootstrapping SIG-Store to help prove end-to-end viability of what SIG-Store does. I'm not going to go into the weeds, but it's a signing mechanism to help, again, predict tamper protection and authenticity across the build process and other forms. And it's in beta now. It's not in production because GitHub has some issues. Like they're using OIDC and some limitations and service accounts, blah, 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 blah. But it is doing end-to-end. That is the kind of leverage. Everybody who's using Brew will benefit from this. Sigstore benefits from it. The homebrew ecosystem benefits from it. And yeah, there's an organization behind there trying to create a for-profit entity around Brew. God bless them. Go for it. Have a great time. The Brew ecosystem is winning here. We are very hands-off. When we pay somebody to do some work, or when a grant comes to us and we talk to them, whether it's a for-profit or it doesn't matter, right? One of the first things I explain to them is there will be some bullshit lawyers coming in with a contract about the grant from the Linux Foundation because lawyers got a lawyer. And it has terms and there'll be a statement of work. And it is about as enforceable as you think it is. Not at all. We're going to give you money. You're going to do work. And the first rule is make us want to do it again. And if after the end of the job, it's all done and we look at it and we're like, meh, then when you come back for more money, you're going to go, meh. And if you come back to us and say, look at all these great things you did, and we see the difference, we're like, hell, we're going to fund you again. How can we do more? How can we double up, right? And that works incredibly well. The holding hands part is even from the moment the grant starts, the application starts, we're not like a normal grant organization too, where you have a grant season and there's an opaque wall and you send things over and there's a jury of people. I'll tell you how it works. You talk to me. Like literally you talk to me. There's an initial, like you send a proposal and some of the things like for a gardening refurb somewhere in England, like, no, thank you. And then we set up a meeting and I talk to you about your project and I help you shape it to fit our agenda and to also build on our experience of what works, both with our needs, but also with the ecosystem as a whole. And that is a collaborative process that keeps going. And then once the work starts, we keep you connected into our world. We chat, we know what's going on all these other projects and we see real benefits, which leads to the other amazing outcome and process. By virtue of our position where we're funding across all these different ecosystems, we're able to connect them in ways that they previously were not really connected. And so now we've got folks from Python, PyPI, Ruby, Ruby Gems, Rust, Crates, Eclipse, talking to each other, learning from each other, leading. And so the trusted publishing specification that became a critical part of PyPI's publishing security is being adopted now by Rust and by Ruby Gems and other package ecosystems. Because there's trust. And we hold a quarterly roundtable, 2 in person, 2 virtually. And we get together in a room not much smaller than this. And we talk about stuff, whatever happens to be on our mind. And we talk about trusted publishing. We talk about end of life situations. And it's amazing. And that community chats as well. And it's literally just our friends and family. It's people we've had to work with. Sometimes we haven't even funded them. We're like, you should come into the conversation. You'd be great. So we spend money, but at the end of the day, this is what wins. And so projects that are going to fare well are ones where there are already engineering resources. There is already a community around it that can be galvanized, can be pointed in the right direction. And our money doesn't last, but that stuff does. It creates real mass and real momentum of change. And so that, again, is what we look for in an investment and an outcome. So now we come to the really ugly stuff. Let's talk about the economics of open source and open source security. I don't have pretty pictures for here because it's not a pretty picture. There's really nothing good about this situation. So most of open source funding today is OSPOs that sort of doing some sort of weird combination of marketing, a little bit of desperation. We should make sure these guys don't die tomorrow. And it's just not wired for software engineering. Most open source foundations are not software shops. They're events, they're community, they're legal, some of that. And when they try to be, it doesn't work very well, does it, Jonathan? We actually tried hiring people, including Jonathan, to work on some stuff. And one of the things we learned is that we specifically are not a software organization. We're a fund. We're a very specific kind of fund. We focus on our outcomes. We stay very lean. But the problem, beyond Jonathan's travails, right, is that there are not very many places that are software sort of foundations that do software engineering, right? The real engineering input comes from nights and weekends volunteers, passionate people, and engineers working at corporations who have found it in their best interest to contribute to a project. And there are gaps there that are not well covered, right? And figuring that out, right? It's not by getting more nights and weekends out of people that we're going to solve this problem, right? It's by getting more corporations to look upstream and realize that it is in their best interest to do something about this. So you can't fund more nights and weekends. There are a lot of reasons. Let's say there's a fine individual who's doing great work, right? We love them. They're awesome. They're part of the community. Even if we gave them money, even if we said, you know what, we trust you. You're like, our lawyers don't know who the hell you are, but we'll just write it. We'll throw you some cash and maybe you'll go to Fiji or maybe you'll do some work. Talk about non-enforceability. There's literally no reputational thing there whatsoever. They don't have the extra time and they're juggling 1,000 priorities. And to be blunt, they're probably not even competent to do the work they're asking them to do there because that's how they got into this problem in the first place, right? The people who are competent on the particular body of code are not experts in the problems that we're asking them to solve. That doesn't magically go away when you add money. And it's really expensive. It becomes a staffing role on a project of one. I don't mind paying for a staffing role at Eclipse Foundation with how many developers total across the Eclipse Foundation? Yeah, no, across all projects. 2,500 developers in the Eclipse Foundation are benefiting from Mika and his team doing security infrastructure work. If instead I go to Fred or Mary working on really cool open source project something and give them enough money to keep working on it, the leverage is zero, right? And the risk is super high. And part of the problem here is that open source projects are actually just as capitalistic as corporations are, right? So why are corporations terrible at security? Anyone? It's right there. You don't have to, like, I gave you the answer, right? Because if you're working on security and some other company is working on growth, the customers are too stupid or too slow to figure out the problem, or you can wait till later on. And there's no regulation forcing you to be that way. And so you're going to lose to the one that's focusing on growth, more features, more sales, more nothing, whatever, right? And so everybody prioritizes growth until they have achieved some position of market comfort that allows them to say, shit, we better protect this success that we've had with some security. Otherwise, we're going to look like a bunch of idiots, right? That is every corporation ever. Open source projects are the same, whether they're competing for money or for GitHub stars or dependence or some sort of attention or their own, as an individual developer, validation of I'm working on something really cool and important. They tend to focus on what their customers are telling them or what they think is needed, or God help us, they're going to build the next version 2 and it's going to be much better this time. So that's a problem. And then we get to the public infrastructure, things like the package managers, right? And there's a mix here. They're spread across. There are a bunch of package manager things that are run by corporations. Some of them feel like they've caught the tiger by the tail and they don't know what to do with it anymore. Some of them haven't realized that yet. There's a few of them that are run by open source projects, notably PyPI, Rust, and Ruby are the 3 most obvious ones. And they survive by the grace of companies like Fastly that donate huge amounts of cloud credits to them to run their CDNs. And the big clouds also donate cloud credits. And that's great, except for the fact that nobody understands the economics of these projects. Their operational and security costs look like this. And their OSPO revenue looks like this. And their cloud credits could disappear anytime somebody has a bad quarter. I want to call out Hannah Aubrey, who's not here, but used to work at Fastly. And even before I asked her, she was already planning and setting up 5-year contracts for their open source recipients so that when Fastly gives them a contract to give them CDN coverage, it's a 5-year deal. That kind of stability is really great. The clouds do not do that. Michael, they should. No public shaming here, right, Michael? He's only my partner. What could you do wrong? So we're working on this. This is a really hard problem. How do, you know, and one of the things that people often don't understand or think about, when you look at any business, guarantee every one of your businesses has 3 types of things inside it. Rainmakers, not-for-profits, and charities. The rainmakers are the primary business. So in the cloud space I used to work in, it's compute, storage, and networking, right? And then you have the not-for-profits, things like key storage, you know, key management, CI/CD tooling. You can charge for it. It's not going to make any fucking money. It's just not. It'll make enough money to cover its costs, but compared to the compute revenue, the storage revenue, the network revenue, it's going to be an also ran every day of the week. But it needs to charge because A, customers value things more when they charge for it, and B, because it has to keep up with the platform. It has to keep implementing security features, infrastructure features, compliance features, all those things. and that costs real money. And the operation of that service costs real money. And then charities like SDKs and documentation, no one's paying you for the documentation on your cloud. So you're going to have to do that, and you're going to have to come up with a budgetary model to fund it adequately to the organization. So the problem is that our package infrastructures are running as charities on flat donations, as opposed to running as not-for-profits with a revenue model. And so the line has already been crossed. Their costs and their future costs are like this, and the revenues are below that. And from a security point of view, that is a nightmare in the making. So this is not an ask for money, but if you want to help, we'll talk. So business model is much more important than a funding model. I suppose coughing up cash is cute, but if the product is an operational service and has I will again make these slides available, you will have a problem. We are currently living in that financial debt, organizational debt already. This, by the way, at our annual board meeting for Alpha Omega was deemed one of the most interesting and hard problems that we're going to solve this year. And by solve, I mean start. So let's talk about you. So you're consuming open source. I've worked with a lot of open source projects, and I've had the pleasure of also working with a lot of organizations that work with open source projects, right? Let's just start by saying that every single dependency you have in your business, in your open source project, whether it's open source, private, personal, whatever, it doesn't matter, right? Every dependency you have, it's your code. It's not someone else's code. You can talk about they all you want. If you put it into your application, it is in your build environment, it is in your production environment, it has total access to both, and anything goes wrong with it is your problem, not the maintainers. You have no vendor relationship, you have no contract, you have no nothing. And if you're not feeling that tightness in your chest of like, shit, I'm screwing this up now already, how do I tell my boss to deal with this? You should, because every one of you, and I know this because I talked to a lot of businesses, is doing it wrong, including the big ones. You cannot treat your software as if it came down on the back of a unicorn and is pure and perfect and everything is awesome, all right? So most people think of open source as free as in beer. It's free as in puppies. Those puppies are tearing up your couch, pissing on your carpet, and generally scaring the neighbors and not paying attention, right? Another analogy for you, we're all building software on the shoulders of giants, but those giants are drunk and they're running downhill at full speed, and you are a tiny little thing on top of a giant, right? Your stack doesn't look as significant as you think. So here you go. Most of your risk from your software is external. Most of your spend is internal. If your organization is not in a tech space, in a rapidly expanding landscape, let's call it AI for this year, right? Then your tech organization is probably budgeted as a % of your revenues. What % of your IT budget is spent on software development? What % of that is spent on upstream engagement? Forget maintenance, just even engaging, right? For most organizations, it is vanishingly small, close to zero. If you talk to a risk management person about that kind of situation, they would have a different conversation. So here's my pro tip. You can't sell security, but compliance wins every day of the week. And we are wandering, and I'm not going to talk about CRA and 14028 and things like that, but like we are wandering into a world where the governments are getting a little tired of industry's inability to solve this problem because they're competing as opposed to securing. And so regulation is going to force us to raise our story in various ways, and we're all going to struggle. But the way to change your priorities inside, the easiest way to do that is connecting it to compliance, because compliance is very close to revenue. So there are various ways to talk about criticality, and people have their own metrics. There's a thing that Rob Pike wrote about 5 years ago about looking at the number of GitHub stars and the number of dependents and other. There is like that notion was quaint 5 years ago. It is not true anymore. It is not correct. Going back to my point, the smallest dependency you have, the most insignificant little left pad-like text string formatter, has total access to your environment. And if the developer of that walks away and throws their toys out of the pram and breaks your build because you don't cache your dependencies, right? Your build is broken. If they walk away and then have a domain takeover and somebody takes over the stuff and starts injecting code, we're now dependent upon your malware detection of legitimate code, not tampered code, but legitimate code coming up through your supply chain, right? Your weaknesses are about the processes, not any one project. There are no small dependencies. There are just insufficient processes around them. Okay? Every single line of code has access to, like, unless you're very good with your build system, right? You're running scripts at install scripts from packages that have the ability to go off and exfiltrate information from your build. And it's possible you've locked down your production environments really well, but most organizations are still struggling to do that. So don't use somebody's criticality score, look at it from your context and assume that it has total access to your environment and think about risk that way and start prioritizing your environments with the code that you put in them. How much do you know about that code? How much are you reviewing that code? Would you let one of your engineers put unreviewed code into your login system? If the answer is yes, I can't help you. So I think I sort of made the point again through size as risk. This was hilarious, by the way. On a lark, I got Michael's help. We asked an AI to generate the XKCD image as a bunch of like computer boxes. I am so beyond tickled with that particular image. It's lovely. So, okay. So here are your choices. You're like, well, Michael, you've just told me I'm screwed and I'm not doing the job. What am I supposed to do about it? You have exactly 3 choices, right? You look at your upstream supply. You either find a way to fix it. We can talk about that ad nauseum, engaging with them, even knowing who they are and talking to them. Having any engineer in your company who is able to commit a PR to fix a problem before somebody else gets around to doing it, right, is a good way. Paying a vendor to fix the thing for you, it's an okay way. Depends on how you trust the vendor and watching the results. Fixing is a really good path, and you can work all the way up at the top of the supply chain to some deep dependency and go and say, hey, there's a bug here, can I fix it? It has issues because it'll take a while for it to percolate through your dependency graph. Forking is another option, right? And you don't have to hard fork it, but let's be clear. If you're not keeping up to date with your dependencies, you are carrying a bunch of hard forks around that are unmaintained, unsanctioned, unknown, and unclear, right? And certain large companies who are based in Redmond used to have a policy of a huge barrier to get an open source project for use inside, and then the same barrier to get an update to it. How did that work out, Michael? Vulnerabilities. Right? Other companies have similar failings, believe me, it's all the same. Forking is hard because you have to be able to build that stuff. But if you start building it and you realize, oh, this wasn't so hard at all, then maybe you can build everything and get rid of a whole bunch of tamper risks and have control over your supply chain. One of the best things you can do is realize that I don't need this shit and stop using some random thing because somebody said it was really cool and it was easier, right? There is no greater force in the universe, right? You've got like electromagnetic and this and that, strong nuclear, and then an engineer working at an insurance company whose boss is on their ass telling them you got to get this thing done by the end of the month. They're stuck on some getting tab A into slot B, and they find a Stack Overflow article that says npm install foo. And then below that, it says, never do this. This package is insecure. It'll kill your system. They're going to do it. If it gets tab A into slot B and they get to their weekend, they're doing it, right? So, you have to have a plan for that. You have to stop using crappy packages. You have to think about how your ingestion works, how you're even allowing packages into your system, right? If you know that npm install foo is a bad idea, how are you stopping engineers from doing that, right? These are important questions. And then after they happen, how the hell do you get rid of things that you didn't want to have in your supply chain? One of the interesting hybrids of these two is forking and foregoing. If there's something you're using and you realize, I only use like these little bits of code, well, then why are you bringing all this other attack surface, right? And you look at the code and say, it was nice, they wrote it once, we could maintain this. And so you do a hard fork of a very small piece of it and just say, you know what, we own this code. String formatting, I think we're going to do this ourselves. The risk is not worth it. And this is, again, where that internal cost versus that hidden external cost plays out. Doing the math properly here will actually save you a lot of grief in the long run. So the conclusion of that is it's not just your code, it's your problem, right? And I really want you to just internalize that. It is so valuable. So, but the most important thing, how am I doing on time? I'm doing great, this is good, okay. Of all the things that we've learned over the past 3 years, the most important thing is that it's about people. So this is just a subset of the people we got to work with over the past few years. But the real point here is not that you know who any of these are. I can point a laser at one of them. That's Jonathan. He gave us a lot of money. That was really awesome. That's Mark Rosinovich. There's Eric Brewer. There's Dave Nally. There are executive stakeholders at the companies that are essentially providing us air cover to do things, but they just gave money. These people did work. They create real value. And what we get out of it is by literally having social connections with those people, we can trust them to do greater things. My contracts don't, like somebody says, well, how should I estimate this work? I say, estimate it the best you can. If you're wrong, we'll figure out how to give you more money. Don't sandbag me or don't give me buffer estimates, because then we're just wasting money for both of us. There's trust. And as a consumer of open source, right, you should have a relationship with the stuff you consume. You wouldn't use a vendor without having some sort of vendor trust established, right? The more known the vendor, the more likely the contract is to be painful. The less known the vendor, the more likely you have somebody whose job it is to hassle that vendor and keep things on track. And yet you consume source code from some dude in the middle of nowhere without really knowing about it or thinking about it. And it's not that that's intrinsically bad. There's a lot of really great software there, but if you have no relationship, you have no recourse. When you show up at that person's door saying, hey, vulnerability 1, 2, 3, 4, it's kind of blocking me. Could you take this PR? If they'd never heard of you, you'd never met with them, it's going to be a much longer conversation. If you show up one day when it's not a crisis and not a situation, say, hey, my name's Bob, work at 3Years Foundation, we're using your stuff, here to help if we can, might come in PR to like, what do I have to know from you? Really appreciate your work. And by the way, really appreciate your work. It buys you a lot of happiness. So imagine an adopt a highway mindset. Imagine if you had a company with, I don't know, say 1,000 software engineers, and your inventory of supply chain was, let's just say 2,000. If every engineer adopted 2 projects, not to go off and do a lot of work, but just to be like, I'm the point of contact. If something hits the fan here, I'm the one who's going to go talk to that project. And I'm going to talk to them before it hits the fan, right? Then when it does, you're a lot better off. When it doesn't, let's go back to Log4Shell, right? Companies were sending lawyergrams to Log4j developers. People trying to contact them, even if their friends couldn't get through because their inboxes were exploding. There was no path. There was no connection, right? So the time to establish, the best time to plant a tree, 30 years ago. Second best time, today, right? Your relationship with your supply chain really matters. So I've talked a lot about the past few years. I tried to compress thousands of meetings, millions of dollars into like a few short slides. What I'm going to talk about now is a little bit shorter, but where we're going, what we're thinking about the next year and beyond, and some of the really big, hairy problems that we worry about. So we'll start with, first of all, we're just going to keep doing what we're doing. And to make that more clear, last year, we spent about 60% of our spending budget, planned budget, on security staffing. That's a lot. It tells you that we think it's very effective, and we plan to keep doing that. We're being a little bit more cautious about taking on more staffing engagements because otherwise it'll just eat our whole budget. Package repos are the app stores of software development. Whether we like it or not, developers make huge trust decisions, assumptions that the package repo is providing certain guarantees of namespace correctness and no malware and other basic truths. And they're not always right, but you know, I can imagine a world where we go to a decentralized package model and distribution thing and doesn't feel any better. I like the leverage that the package repositories provide us, even if it's very expensive to do so. So we're going to keep helping them and securing them. There's a set of guidelines developed in the OpenSSF around securing package repositories, and we're going to work with them to keep driving them forward on that. As I've mentioned, we love audits. We love audits that follow up with remediation. I'm working with an organization called OSTIF, and with the Eclipse Foundation, we want to take a concept called a rapid security review. It takes about 4 hours to do, spread over a few weeks, and then a 6-month check-in. I want to productize that. I want to normalize it so anybody can go off and say, oh, here's the playbook in a GitHub repo. I'm going to go run that one and do it myself. Or I have an improvement to suggest. And we obviously want to automate more and more of that so we can get those signals early on to help prioritize action. And then, because we really, like in this space, everybody should acknowledge that it is a decades-old technical debt, but you know, it doesn't have the same clarity of the Y2K problem where we knew what the problem was, we knew what the solution was, we had a timeline. We don't. There's a lot of stuff we don't know. We're still figuring it out. There are still very big unsolved problems. So we are very comfortable just spending some chunk of money on things that we don't know how they're going to work out. We're experimenting. We're learning. So that is the sort of high-level picture. Here are some big, hairy problems that we're looking at. So one of the problems is our funding model. We are one of very small number of organizations funding open source in the way we do today. There's the Sovereign Tech Agency, there's us, there's our friends at the Open Tech Foundation, Open Tech Agency, or OTF, Open Tech Fund, that are slightly different focus. We are very keen and increasingly shoving people towards to creating a co-funding opportunity. We're trying to normalize it for organizations to say, you know what, I could help out. And we offer a huge multiplier, right? You put in $10,000, we'll put in 10 from Microsoft, 10 from Google, 10 from Amazon, we'll get somebody else over there, and all of a sudden your 10 is getting a 5 to a 10 to 1 ratio impact, right? We'd like to see that pattern more normal, because at any one organizational level, this is an intractable problem. But if a few organizations get together towards an area and care about it, we can make leverage. So for instance, if a bunch of, I don't know, I'm gonna say point of sale businesses got together and said, we're worried about this part of our stack, or we'd like to go off and do this. And they came to us and said, we're worried. We'd say, we are too, let's talk. And if they show us to put some skin in the game, we're gonna put some too, with the intent that that will then become something that their business can say, we spent that money and it worked out pretty well. Maybe we could do, twice as much next year and not need Alpha Omega or whatever. So it's a hard problem. It's very hard to change attitudes and businesses and priorities, especially when the economy is going to shit, but we're trying. We want to do more audits. We want to make the audits more normal. In some cases, like even talking about it as a rapid security review says it's not an audit, because even most of the audits that get done are not really audits. They're just somebody looked hard at the stuff. We want to make this a lot easier, a lot more normal. Salsa, SigStore, and the security baseline are foundational technologies being developed in the community of the OpenSSF. We think they're very important. They are things that will enable transformation across ecosystems. They'll make it easier for us to start gathering data and making statements about tampering, about the process of an organization, the culture of it, in ways that are attestable, verifiable, gatherable in big data forms. And so we're still interested in incubating growth there. It's still early days. One of my favorite things is that everybody's build process is a steaming nightmare of Jenkins write-only scripts, so people could be adding things. Don't touch this. I don't know how it works. If you break it, the tests will fail, which makes it impossible for anybody else to build your stuff. That's true for open source. It's true for corporations. It makes builds slower, which means people less likely to run more tests, which means they're less likely to live closer to head. All kinds of bad things happening there. In open source in particular, I think it would be very nice to be able to not have to make trust decisions about somebody's shitty Jenkins server doing the build for some package. I'd much rather just build it myself and have it just be a source integrity check. One of the great things about Go is that Go builds everything from source. The packages are just references to GitHub repos or URLs, and then there's a non-repudiation index, transparency log, but the compiler just builds it locally on your machine. So all of the attacks in the Salsa threat model, that's the SLSA, all the build system attacks go away because it's built on your machine. If your build system isn't secure, it doesn't matter what happened upstream. So reproducible builds are great. The Eclipse Foundation, and particularly the Adoption project, has been leading the way there with a Java runtime called Tamarin. They are one of the truly great reproducible builds out there, being verified now by Red Hat as well. Thank you very much to the Red Hat folks. Debian has made incredible strides towards making their package builds reproducible as well. I don't think they've achieved the point where they have multiple organizations verifying the reproducibility, but that is an important step. So that's sort of normalizing things that everybody knows we should be doing, but still haven't really happened yet. Then some big, scary ideas. So there's an awful lot of AI stuff going on these days. It's cool, it's hip. I won't, there are good reasons and bad. There are an awful lot of open source AI libraries, and a lot of people are using them with really no regard whatsoever to whether they're secure or not, including the teams building them. And so we would like to instill a better culture of security, get in there early on, including things like Hugging Face and effectively a package manager for models. So we're keen to do some things there. We're also very keen to tackle that problem of Omega, the scale, through AI. And we've taken a few swings at it. It's quite remarkable. Even a year ago, about a year ago, maybe 9 months ago, we sort of tried, go look at this code and find vulnerabilities in the code. And we didn't even try very hard, and it found stuff. And now when we do it, we are able to do some pretty interesting analyses. And we're also looking at that sort of depth-first supply chain audit of looking a mini audit across it, understanding the governance, the security posture, and doing a depth-first traversal. It's not there yet, but we haven't tried very hard, and we're very keen because that produces scale and opportunity. It's very interesting. But without the remediation part, you still have a problem. And even with the remediation part, as my friends Munawar and Jonathan both know, getting the people to accept those changes is very hard. So there are still problems ahead, but if we can put it in their hands, this could be very interesting. I've talked about business models for sustained open source security. We're actually hiring a consultant to work with us and actually tackle this problem, working with major package managers, building an inventory of the problem, and coming up with a business strategy or proposals for possible business models to allow us to create sustainability for these services. It's critical. Almost every business has, and most of you here, in some sort of incident response team dealing with the regular flow of incidents and so forth. That is not easy to think about when you move into an open source ecosystem with projects of 1 or 2 or 3 people. And when it does happen, they either dismiss it or it becomes, or they find themselves the next XZ, and then now in a situation of chaos. And at that point in time, if somebody would show up, even if they were well reputed, saying, hey, I'm Seth from the Python Software Foundation, I'm here to help you, they'd be like, the hell you are, you're another attacker, pretending to be Seth. How do I know you're you, right? And so we think about this as like a volunteer fire department. We don't have a model yet, or a business model, or even a way to think about it in terms of like having a paid fire department acting as incident response or proactive security or whatever. But just as the fire department defines the codes, does the inspections, enforces the codes, does fire prevention, extinguishes fires, contains fires when it can't extinguish them, and then does the postmortem or the forensic analysis. There are a lot of things to be done there in the open source ecosystem that we want to try and sort of think about. And so we are leveraging our community. The kind people that are working with us, all those pictures up there, many of them have agreed to be part of a very early effort to think about this. And we're not talking about it much because we still don't know what the hell we're doing. Yes, question. I will repeat your question for you while I'm chasing the mic around. So I'm going to answer your question. The question was, if I am a consumer of open source, how are we responding to a fire in some particular project? If I am a consumer and I call you, how are you helping? And we're not here for you. I want to be super clear. This effort is meant to help the open source maintainers cope with their situation, not you downstream ones who are unfortunately affected by it, because the resourcing alone is unimaginable. If a large bunch of corporations said, man, we all depend upon the same stuff, and it would really suck if there'd be another XZ or Log4Shell or whatever happening there. We should get together and put our incident response teams together in coordination and have a plan for us to deal with it. That'd be great. And if you want to talk to me about doing that in coordination with what we're doing here, that would be awesome. I mean, like, you know, engagement doesn't necessarily only mean just writing source code or fixing PRs and fixing vulnerabilities, right? It's all these things. So I'm very open to that approach. What have I missed? Oh, common open source metadata. So as we look at the scale problem and everything we did, every time you can't turn over a stone or swing at something without tripping over a team that has gone off and recreated the same stupid stuff as everybody else. Everybody builds their own crawler to get data out of the NVD database. They do the same thing to pull stuff at OSV. They go and get GitHub Archive, or they pull it directly from GitHub, or both. Right? It's a hot mess, and everybody builds their own thing. And then they start doing dependency resolution and figuring out what the dependencies of foo are, and everybody has their own heuristic for that because it is not a resolvable question. And they all do the same thing, and they all do all that work just to get to the point where they could start doing some meaningful analysis at scale across this space. And it's all public data. It's all pretty static too. So why is everybody building this over and over again? Because the current stories that we have of central, trustable, reliable data are not either well-known or not one of those attributes. And I'm still learning about this space a lot, but I believe that if we create a sort of trustworthy public good that has all the metadata, is designed to extend to other forms, so you can pull it in and connect it with your own private data. If you don't have a risk database of all your dependencies and how you evaluated them, you should, and you should be able to connect that to other data out there to do your own queries on it, right? If a company wants to start doing scale analysis for Omega to find the needles in the haystack that are risk waiting to happen, they should be able to do that as trivially as firing up SQLite and doing some clever queries. Today, it is a mountain of work to even get to the starting point of that. And so one of my goals is just to normalize that, flatten the space, and make it very easy for anybody, commercial or open source or research, to go off and do useful work on top of. And if a bunch of businesses spring up and create enterprise-focused businesses, taking that data and selling it as value to the enterprises, great. That would be fantastic. It'll make the world more secure. So, as promised, here's the QR code to the deck. There's also a link at the bottom, go.xwin.io/ao-lessons-2025. I have a few minutes left for more questions, but I want to, first of all, thank you all for your time and your heartbeats. I have the best job in the world working on this project. I get to meet amazing people, and I'll be around after this talk if anybody wants to talk more beyond the questions. So again, thank you very much. So we have a few minutes for questions, right? We've got a whopping 5 minutes. Great. Any questions? That was easy. You're stunned. No, you don't. Not you. Sorry, I was. Okay, go ahead. Here, have a mic.
What is the current status? The idea of a fire department's been kicking around for a couple of years from the openness stuff. Is that gone anywhere? Is that something that Alpha Omega would fund? What's the plan there?
So a few years ago, the OpenSSF wrote up a proposal for an open source cert of some kind. Krob was amazing. Emily Fox was part of that as well. It assumed that they were operating enterprise business and could get funded with several $1 million a year to start with, never having done it before. And so it didn't have any funding from the OpenSSF board because reasons. We are not trying to recreate that business model. We are starting with very much a very small volunteer conversation. And literally all that's happened so far is one meeting. And we got together and we talked about it, and people said, yep, we should do another meeting. And that's sort of my test for success, is can we get to the point where people's like, we should make this a regular meeting, and we're going to keep figuring out what we're going to do and how we're going to start it. We're going to start very small. We are not going to be the 800 line for a corporation asking for help, right? We're not even going to be the 800 line, the hotline for all open source projects in any one ecosystem. We're going to start very small and learn about what to do there. You have a question? Okay.
Oh, I wish. I'm still looking for that myself. But as Red Hat, as a root and a CNALR, part of what we're trying to do is help with the open source projects upstream who need help and need that assistance. Now, does that mean we can do all your incident response for you? No, but we can help with the CVE and the CVD processes. And we've done that a lot with using the VIN system. I'm not going to call that perfect, but it's a matter of getting the right projects and people in there and getting them coordinated. So we've developed that relationship with both CISA, JCDC, as well as MITRE. So that's what we're trying to do, is to support. Notice I didn't say represent, to support open source. Worked on that too.
All right. Okay. Last call for questions. Again, thank you so much for your time. I'll be around tomorrow as well. Have a nice day.